Imagine a world with no internet, no iPhones, no TV, just a radio and a simple life to keep you entertained. Now imagine living in the same world while being in a worldwide pandemic, forcing you to stay indoors with nothing to do in an effort to save yourself from dying in a massive flu. This was reality for many across the globe in 1918 when the Spanish flu epidemic came into the picture. I have prepared for you this speech today in order to inform you on the realities of the H1N1 outbreak in 1918 as we are going through a similar one today. I am a credible source to speak on this topic because I've researched the topic thoroughly, and I, along with you, are also living in a pandemic. I will now tell you the origins of the Spanish flu, what life was like during the pandemic, and the effects of life after the virus. I will begin with how the Spanish flu came to be. The origins of the Spanish flu. All of the facts are from the article The Spanish Flu by the History.com editors, updated on March 27, 2020, and originally written October 12, 2010. So it is unclear where the origins of the Spanish flu first started, but it was first observed in Europe, America, and parts of Asia, and then it spread to almost every part of the planet within months. It's called the Spanish flu because Spain had the most cases of it, but it's really called the Spanish flu because of Spain at the time had a thing called free media, which allowed them to cover the news at their own will. So it naturally, the earth was being informed by Spain, so its name was the Spanish flu. Scientists still don't know where the flu originated, but it is to be theorized to be from France, China, Britain, or the US. The first known case was reported at a camp in Fort Riley, Kansas, on March 11, 1918. At the time, World War I was happening, so the deployment of soldiers in the U.S. did aid in the spread of the Spanish flu. What the Spanish flu was like. The first wave of the Spanish flu happened in the spring. There was 2 waves, and the first wave was very mild. The symptoms were very much like a normal flu. That you had typical flu symptoms like chill, fever, fatigue, and you recovered after several days, and the death toll was rather low. But then the second wave of the Spanish flu came in the fall, and it was highly contagious. The victims now died within hours of days of getting symptoms, and their skin turned blue and their lungs filled with liquid, so they would suffocate to death. And as you can imagine, that's pretty serious. Without a cure or anything, many people died, and the average American lifespan during these times, this whole year, dropped by 12 years because of the Spanish flu. I will now talk to you about life during the pandemic of 1918. All of the facts I am about to say come from a website called theatlantic.com article titled How the 1918 Pandemic Frayed Social Bonds by Noah Y. Kim. Americans struggled to keep their social bonds. Life on lockdown in 1918 was even lonelier than life on lockdown today. Like today, dark jokes, gossip about the pandemic, and speculation about what's going to happen next happened back then, but just without Twitter. They lacked the many communication technologies that have allowed us to stay in contact with friends, family, and the news to keep updated. It was a sudden loss of community, as it was for us today too. Many people were furious with the inconveniences of isolation. Like us, many things were shut down, so many loved ones back then weren't able to send their other loved ones gifts for Christmas. Events such as sports were being canceled, and people were very upset about this because it was one of the only forms of entertainment they had at the time. The St. Louis Post was quoted saying, "The football games are all off. The Spanish flu has put a damper on the gridiron." People were also living in constant fear. John M. Barry, author of The Great Influenza, told author of the article, Noah Y. Kim, that the feelings of loneliness during the pandemic were worsened by fear and mistrust, especially in places where officials hid the truth from the public. The fears of the disease often made people starve to death because others were too scared to even bring them food. Fears were so bad that people would often go up to windows and holler and ask if people were okay and still alive, rather than go in and check on them because they were so scared. Now that I have told you about life during the Spanish flu, I will now speak on how the virus affected life after the pandemic. Life after the Spanish flu. As you can imagine, the death tolls were very high after everything ended. According to an article I previously spoke on from History.com titled Spanish Flu, written by the History.com editors on October 12, 2010, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 ended up being the deadliest pandemic in history, infecting 500 million people worldwide, and 20 to 50 million victims were dead. And this was not all because, but a big a factor in this was World War I was happening during this time, so there was a bunch of deployment of nurses for the war, and so there weren't many helping hands around. All facts from what I am about to say are from the CDC's Public Health Matters blog titled The 1918 Flu Pandemic, Why It Matters, 100 years later, posted online May 14th, 2018 by the CDC blog administrator. An estimated number of 195,000 Americans died during October 1918 alone. 1/3 of the Earth's whole population in total was affected by the Spanish flu. But since the Spanish flu happened, we were able to learn a lot, and since 1918, major medical advances have been able to be thought of. There are now vaccines and treatments for the flu. Flu vaccines, antiviral drugs to treat flu illness, antibiotics to treat other infections like pneumonia, and even another disease have been invented, and there is also a global influenza watch system that was developed in the past 102 years because of this virus. There's also a much better understanding of the non-medical interventions, such as like social distancing, proper hand washing, coughing etiquette, and social distancing. Even though we did learn a lot from this pandemic, there's still a lot more to learn. With that being said, this concludes the end of my speech. Today I spoke to you about a subject that is quite relevant to our lives today, the Spanish flu of 1918. I spoke on the origins and causes of the outbreak of the virus. I informed you on what life was like during the pandemic, and I also spoke on what life was like after the Spanish flu in 1918. With that being said, stay inside. Although we now have many things to keep us entertained and quarantined from the coronavirus, like the internet and the TV, we also know what it's like to live in a tragic worldwide pandemic, like the one in 1918. Let's all hope and pray that we are able to cure this virus soon.